May 2, 1957, Small's Paradise, Harlem. Frank Costello had just been shot. Bleeding and cornered, he made a single phone call, not for revenge, not for pride. This was strategy, a calculated move to survive a coup without igniting a war. That one call would shift the balance of New York's underworld. But to understand how Bumpy Johnson turned shelter into power, we have to rewind. It was 3:14 a.m. The kind of hour when decent men sleep and indecent men count their earnings. Bumpy Johnson sat alone in the back office of Small's Paradise. The air conditioner rattled against the window frame like an old man fighting for one more breath. Out front, a phonograph still played Duke Ellington's horn drifting through empty halls thick with cigarette smoke and spilled whiskey. The phone rang. Persistent, demanding. Bumpy let it ring 3 times. A man who answers too quickly reveals he has been waiting, and waiting suggests weakness. He picked up. "I'm listening." On the other end was Frank Costello. His voice trembled, and that told Bumpy everything. "Vito put a bullet in my head tonight," Costello said. "Grazed my skull, left a trench you could plant seeds in. Next one won't miss." Bumpy said nothing. He let the silence stretch until it grew heavy. "I need a place where his people can't reach me," Costello continued. "Every safe house in Manhattan, Vito knows them. Every judge I bought, every cop I paid, they're all calculating whether I'll live long enough to matter." "How bad?" Bumpy asked calmly. "Hair and scalp," Costello replied. "Roosevelt patched me up and sent me out the service exit. They called me lucky." His laugh was bitter. "Lucky means the shooter flinched. Next time he won't." Smoke curled toward the ceiling as Bumpy calculated. Desperation had value, territory had value, gratitude had value. "What are you asking me, Frank?" "Sanctuary in Harlem, or I drive toward Canada and hope I reach the border first." 3 seconds of silence. Then Bumpy spoke, not with charity but with opportunity. "Come to Harlem now, alone, no bodyguards, no drivers who'll talk once fingers start breaking." A pause. "How do I know you won't kill me yourself and sell me to Vito?" Bumpy's voice hardened. "If I wanted you gone, Frank, I'd have done it years ago when you thought you owned this city. I don't need Vito's money, I need you alive and grateful, and we both know which one of you is worth more to me." The line went quiet. "I'll be there in 40 minutes, Costello said. "Where?" "You'll know when you cross 110th Street, someone will be waiting." Bumpy hung up. He sat in the dark office, listening to Duke Ellington's horn echo through the club. The most powerful mob boss in America had just called a black man in Harlem and begged for shelter. The old order wasn't cracking. It had a bullet hole in its head. And whoever recognized that first would own the city before the year ended. Bumpy picked up the phone again and dialed a number memorized, never written down. A woman answered, alert despite the hour. "Stephanie's place." "Wake everyone," Bumpy said. "We've got a guest, street-facing windows, a door that locks, bandages and iodine ready." "Who is it?" "Someone who just learned money can't buy an extra heartbeat when shooters come calling." "I'll be there in 20 minutes." To understand why Frank Costello was bleeding in a phone booth that night, you have to go back 6 months. Little Italy. A private dinner at Tommaso's. The owner had locked the doors at 9 and told the staff it was a private event. Cuban cigars clouded the air, Barolo from Piedmont flowed generously. Costello sat at the head of the table, 20 years of building power weighed on his shoulders. Across from him sat Vito Genovese, drinking too fast, smiling too much. Both were dangerous signs. "You're getting old, Frank," Vito said casually. "Not an insult, an observation. You've run things your way, judges, lawyers, political donations. It's made us rich." He leaned forward. "But I wonder if you've forgotten what business we're really in." Costello set down his glass carefully. "And what business is that?" "Fear." Vito's smile disappeared. "We make sure when a man thinks of crossing us, he remembers what happened to the last man who tried." He swirled his wine. "You can buy judges, but at the end of the day, a judge goes home to a wife and children, and you know what makes him stay bought?" "The knowledge," Vito continued, "that if a man stops staying bought, someone pays his wife and children a visit and explains things in a way they'll never forget." Costello's voice was quiet but firm. That's the old way, the way that brings federal agents knocking, the way that splashes headlines about organized crime across every newspaper, the way that ends with all of us either in prison or in the ground. Vito leaned forward, elbows pressing into the white tablecloth. His voice dropped to a near whisper. Let me tell you something about the old way, Frank. The old way worked for 500 years in Sicily. The old way built what we have now. And the old way says that when a boss loses his edge, when he starts thinking like a businessman instead of a wolf, it's time for someone younger and hungrier to step in before everything collapses. Costello felt his jaw tighten, the muscles in his neck stiffened. He had seen this coming. For months, he had watched Vito move money through channels he wasn't meant to notice. He had watched longtime loyal soldiers quietly attend meetings with Genovese lieutenants, returning with new ideas about how operations should run. But knowing betrayal is coming does not soften the moment you sit across from a man you've worked beside for 20 years and watch him calmly sharpen the blade meant for your back. If you're planning something, Costello said evenly, the commission won't allow it. We have rules, procedures. Vito smiled again, cold, wide, and empty. The commission will do exactly what I tell them once you're out of the picture, because the commission understands power, and power doesn't come from lawyers or political favors. Power comes from being the man no one dares cross. He paused. And right now, Frank, no one's afraid of you. The dinner ended 20 minutes later. Handshakes were exchanged. Promises were made to talk again soon. The kind of polite lies men tell when they both know that the next meeting might end with one of them buried in New Jersey soil. Costello returned to his apartment on Central Park West and spent the next 3 months pretending everything was fine. Pretending Vito was just posturing. Pretending the old system still worked. He was wrong. It was 10:55 p.m. Frank Costello stepped into the lobby of his building, tired from dinner with union representatives who needed reassurance about their pensions amid growing unrest among the dockworkers. The doorman had stepped away to fix a radiator leak upstairs. The lobby was empty. Empty except for Costello, his reflection in the polished marble, and the man who stepped from behind a decorative palm, gun already raised. The shooter looked young, mid-20s. His eyes carried the flat emptiness of someone who had done this before and felt nothing about doing it again. He lifted the gun with steady precision. "This is from Vito, Frank," he said calmly. "He's tired of waiting." Costello opened his mouth to plead, to reason, to stall. Just 3 more seconds. But the gun fired. His body reacted before his mind could. He jerked left at the last fraction of a second. The bullet tore across his scalp instead of through his skull. It burned a violent path through hair and flesh before embedding itself in the marble wall behind him. The force spun him around and dropped him to his knees. His head struck the cold floor hard enough to blur his vision. Blood streamed down his face, hot, thick, slipping into his eyes and mouth. Footsteps thundered down the staircase. The lobby door burst open, then slammed shut as the shooter vanished into the Manhattan night. The doorman rushed toward him, shouting about calling an ambulance. Costello grabbed his sleeve and pulled him close enough to smell the onions from his dinner. "No ambulance," Costello whispered. "No police." "Take me to Roosevelt Hospital," Costello whispered, "through the service entrance. Tell them it was a mugging. Tell them I didn't see the face. Do you understand?" The doorman nodded, eyes wide with fear, and helped him to his feet. The ride to the hospital passed in a haze of pain and strategy. Even as doctors stitched his torn scalp and called him lucky, Costello's mind was racing. Lucky. As if luck had anything to do with the fact that Vito Genovese had just declared war on him. As if luck could change the reality that every safe house he owned in Manhattan had just become a potential grave. That was when he made the call to Bumpy Johnson. Because there was nowhere left to hide except the one place in New York where Vito's money, guns, and reputation meant nothing at all. At 4:17 a.m., Frank Costello arrived in Harlem. He slumped in the backseat of a worn Chrysler driven by a man whose name he never asked and was never told. The car stopped in front of a brownstone on Edgecombe Avenue. Bumpy Johnson stood on the steps, smoking a cigarette like the night was ordinary. Like he hadn't just agreed to shelter the most hunted man in New York from an organization known for making people disappear. "Get him inside," Bumpy told the driver calmly. "Take the car to the garage on 145th, leave the keys under the mat. After that, you forget tonight, you forget his face, you forget this address." He paused. "You understand what forgetting means?" The driver nodded, hands trembling slightly as he helped Costello out of the car. Costello's head was wrapped in bandages already stained through with red. He moved like a man who had aged decades in a single night. Bumpy watched him climb the steps carefully, knowing one wrong movement could reopen the wound and finish what Vito's shooter had started. The brownstone belonged to Stephanie St. Clair, the woman who once controlled Harlem's numbers racket and still commanded more loyalty on these streets than any Italian boss ever could. Iron bars guarded the windows, the walls were thick. The front room offered a clear view of the entire block. Anyone approaching could be spotted from hundreds of yards away. More than enough time to prepare a response. Bumpy led Costello upstairs to a second-floor bedroom. The windows faced the street. The door had a solid lock. A basin of hot water sat ready on the dresser beside clean bandages and a bottle of whiskey. Costello reached for the whiskey without asking. He poured a heavy glass and swallowed it in one go, blinking back tears. "How long can you keep me here?" he asked. "As long as it takes," Bumpy replied, settling into a chair by the window where he could monitor the street. Then his tone shifted. "But understand something, Frank, this isn't Manhattan. You can't make a call and have judges jump. In Harlem, you're a guest, and guests don't give orders. Guests say thank you, guests stay quiet, guests do exactly what they're told." Costello's jaw tightened, but he nodded. He had no leverage here. "What do you want in return?" "We'll discuss that when you're not bleeding on my friend's carpet," Bumpy said evenly. "For now, you rest, you heal, you stay invisible." He glanced toward the window. "Nobody knows you're here except me, the driver, and Stephanie. And all three of us have strong reasons to keep silent. Vito can tear apart every safe house in Manhattan. He'll never think to look for you here." "Why not?" Costello asked. Bumpy's smile was thin and cold. "Because Harlem doesn't run on money, or fear, or bloodlines." He leaned back. "Harlem runs on respect." He let the word settle. "Respect isn't bought with cash, it isn't enforced with a gun. Vito thinks power is having soldiers who kill on command. I know power is having a neighborhood that lies to federal agents without being asked, that hides bodies without expecting payment, that goes to prison before giving up a name. Vito controls territory," Bumpy had said. "I control people, there's a difference." The hunt. The next morning, Vito Genovese tore through Manhattan like a storm. His men kicked in doors across Little Italy and the Lower East Side. Bookmakers and loan sharks were dragged into alleys, beaten until they swore on their mothers' graves that they hadn't seen Frank Costello. Safe houses in Brooklyn and Queens were raided, furniture smashed, floorboards ripped up, walls torn apart. They found nothing. By the third day, Vito's soldiers had visited every building Costello owned, every restaurant he frequented, every social club where he had ever played cards or sipped espresso. Judges were pressured, police captains were threatened, union bosses were warned that pensions would disappear if information didn't surface. Still nothing. Frank Costello had vanished as completely as if the earth had swallowed him. On the seventh day, Vito sent two men into Harlem to start asking questions. They returned with broken noses and injuries that carried a clear message. Harlem was not interested in helping Italian gangsters settle internal disputes. Anyone who asked the wrong questions wouldn't leave upright if they left at all. Even Vito understood that. By the 19th day, desperation began to show. And desperation on a mob boss is like blood in open water. The other families were watching, calculating, wondering if Vito had moved too quickly, if he had overplayed his hand. If he couldn't eliminate one aging boss who was supposedly isolated and vulnerable, how was he going to lead the commission? How would he command respect? Meanwhile, Costello remained in that second-floor bedroom in Harlem. 19 days. He watched the street through lace curtains as life carried on below. His wound healed slowly, leaving a thick scar that stretched from his temple to the crown of his head, a permanent reminder of how close he had come to dying alone in his own lobby. On the 12th night, Bumpy visited and found him sitting by the window with a glass of whiskey, eyes heavy from too many hours spent imagining every possible ending. "You can't hide forever," Bumpy said, taking the chair opposite him. "Sooner or later Vito finds you, or you get tired of living inside these four walls. Either way, we need a plan that doesn't end with both of us catching bullets." Costello nodded slowly. "I've been thinking for 12 days straight," he said, "and I keep arriving at the same conclusion: I can't fight him." He spoke without drama. "I don't have the soldiers anymore, and even if I did, a war would tear everything apart. The commission would split, families would choose sides, federal agents would circle, we'd all end up in prison or worse." "So you're ready to surrender?" Bumpy asked. Costello let out a dry laugh. "I'm ready to admit the old system is finished. Vito isn't wrong about everything. I've grown comfortable, spent more time in courtrooms than on the streets." He paused. "But he's wrong if he thinks violence is the only kind of power that counts." He looked up. "There's another way, but it means I swallow my pride, and you take a risk that could get you killed." Bumpy leaned forward. "Tell me." For the next 3 hours, Costello outlined a strategy bold enough that only a man with nothing left to lose would attempt it. It required precision, timing, and the courage to walk into a room full of men who wanted you gone and persuade them that keeping you alive served their interests. "I know the rules," Costello explained, tapping his glass with nervous energy. "A boss can't be removed without a vote from the commission. Vito tried to avoid that. That's why he sent a gunman instead of calling a meeting. He wanted it to look random." He looked up. "But I survived, and now everyone knows." Bumpy nodded slowly. "So you force a vote?" "Exactly. I make him sit across from me, in front of the other families, and I offer him something he can't refuse." "What?" "I step down." The words hung in the air. "I retire voluntarily. I keep my life, I keep my dignity, and in exchange the commission establishes clear rules for succession. No more assassinations, no more midnight shootings. From now on, leadership changes happen by vote." Bumpy frowned. "Vito doesn't want you retired in Florida, he wants you buried." Costello's smile was thin. "He'll agree because the alternative is worse." He leaned forward. "If he refuses, if he insists on finishing what he started, the other families will see him as reckless, unstable, a man who puts personal grudges above the organization." He paused. "And once they start thinking that, they'll start wondering who he might target next." Silence filled the room. It was a clever plan, one that turned weakness into leverage, one that used Vito's aggression against him. But there was still one unanswered question. "What do you need from me?" Bumpy asked. Costello met his eyes. "I need you at that meeting." His voice was careful now, the tone of a man asking for something he knows may not be granted. "I need you to walk in with me." "I need you to stand before the commission," Costello said carefully, "and make it clear that Harlem will not tolerate more bloodshed. If a war breaks out between me and Vito, it spills into your territory and you will respond." He held Bumpy's gaze. "They need to understand that peace is worth more than revenge." Bumpy's jaw hardened. This wasn't a favor, it was a seismic shift in New York's power structure. Costello was asking a black man from Harlem to walk into a room full of Italian mob bosses and declare boundaries, to tell them how far their war could go and where it would end. It was a move that could either get him killed, or make him one of the most influential men in the city. And there would be no way of knowing which until it happened. "If I do this," Bumpy said slowly, "if I stand in that room and back your play, I want something in return." Costello waited. "I want recognition. I want the commission to acknowledge Harlem as my territory. No Italian soldier sets foot there without my permission. I want a voice when decisions affect my business." He leaned forward slightly. "I want respect, the kind that comes with power, not the kind you give someone because they're useful." Costello nodded. He had expected this, and he wasn't in a position to refuse. "You'll have it," he said, "I'll see to it." Then his tone sharpened. "But understand something? Walking into that room means you become part of this structure. You play by the rules like everyone else. You can't take the benefits and ignore the obligations." Bumpy shook his head slightly. "I don't need to sit at your table, Frank. I just need to make sure your table doesn't make decisions without considering me." He paused. "There's a difference between being a member and being a partner. I'm offering partnership." He stood. "You either accept that or you take your chances with Vito, but after tonight this conversation is over." The 17 days. The meeting was scheduled for May 24th, 17 days after the shooting. The location, a Little Italy restaurant that had quietly hosted commission gatherings since before Prohibition. In those 17 days, Bumpy prepared. Every soldier in Harlem was briefed. Every loyal hand understood what was at stake. If that meeting went badly, retaliation would be swift and decisive enough to make Vito reconsider starting a war he couldn't finish. On the morning of the 24th, Bumpy put on his best suit. He checked the .45 automatic resting in a shoulder holster beneath his jacket. He didn't intend to use it, but walking into a room full of powerful men unarmed was the kind of mistake that ended before dessert. He met Costello at a midtown diner. They drove to Little Italy in silence, each man aware that the next few hours would determine whether they saw summer or ended up in shallow graves across the river. The restaurant was called Concilio's. The back room had been cleared, no waiters, no customers. 5 men sat around a polished table set only with wine glasses and ashtrays. No food, no distractions. Vito Genovese sat at the head, wearing the expression of a man who believed victory was already secured. The others looked cautious, calculating, like guests unsure whether they had arrived at a wedding or a funeral. Costello entered first, head still bandaged, steps deliberate. Bumpy followed 3 paces behind. The air in the room shifted instantly. The moment they realized a black man had entered their private chamber, the temperature seemed to drop. Vito's face darkened with rage, his hand drifted toward his waistband. Carlo Gambino caught his wrist before he could move further. "Not here," Gambino murmured, "not now, we listen first." Bumpy positioned himself against the back wall where he could see every hand and every pair of eyes. He did not sit. Sitting implied submission. He hadn't come to bow. He had come to negotiate. And negotiation only works when both sides understand that walking away, or escalating, is always an option. Costello remained standing as well. The bandages wrapped around his head were proof of what happens when disputes are settled with bullets instead of words. He poured a glass of wine, steady hands betraying none of the tension in the room. He took one sip. Then he set the glass down firmly. The sound echoed through the silence like a judge's gavel. "Gentlemen," Costello began, his voice steady, the voice of a man who had spent 4 decades running the most profitable criminal machine in America. "We're here because Vito decided leadership should be settled by gunfire instead of the rules we all agreed to follow. He put a bullet in my head and assumed that ended the debate." He let the words hang. He was wrong. Across the table, Vito's jaw tightened. Despite the cool air moving through the restaurant vents, sweat gathered at his temples. "You're finished, Frank," Vito snapped. "Everyone here knows it. You've been hiding in Harlem like a rat in a hole. The only reason you're still alive is because I haven't decided whether killing you is worth the trouble." Costello didn't blink. "Let me make the decision easier for you." His voice turned cold, sharp as January wind off the East River. "I'm retiring, effective immediately. I'm stepping down as head of my family. I'll relocate Florida, California, wherever the commission thinks is far enough away. I'll spend my remaining years playing cards and watching the ocean. I'll die in my bed, not on a sidewalk." He looked directly at Vito. "You get everything you wanted without firing another shot." Silence settled over the table, ice cracked softly in glasses, someone's stomach growled lunch had been skipped. Binano leaned back, studying Costello as if reviewing a contract written in a foreign language. "What's the catch?" he asked. "You don't surrender power just because someone took a shot at you. That's not who you are." Costello nodded slightly. The condition is simple. From this point forward, we establish real succession rules, formal rules, no more midnight assassinations, no more shooters waiting in apartment lobbies. He gestured toward Bumpy, without breaking eye contact with Vito. If someone wants to challenge a boss, they bring it to the commission. We vote, majority rules, the loser accepts the decision and lives. Vito laughed a harsh, humorless sound. You want to turn this into a corporation? Board meetings? Votes? This isn't General Motors, Frank. This is power, it's respect, it's fear. You don't negotiate those with a show of hands. That was when Bumpy spoke for the first time. His voice was calm, but it cut through the room like a blade. You can negotiate anything, he said evenly, if the alternative is bad enough. He took a step forward. You can negotiate peace if the alternative is war. You can negotiate rules if the alternative is chaos, chaos that brings federal agents down on all of you like locusts. Every head turned. No one spoke to Vito Genovese that way, not if they wanted to wake up the next morning. Vito's hands gripped the table edge until his knuckles blanched. Who do you think you are? You're not commissioned, you're not family, you're nothing. Bumpy didn't flinch. I'm the man who kept Frank alive when you couldn't find him, he replied, tone flat as a coroner's report. I control the only territory in New York where your soldiers can't operate without consequences. If war breaks out in Manhattan, it spills into Harlem, and if it spills into Harlem, I push back. He paused, letting the implication settle. You start a war, and it won't stay contained. Gambino cleared his throat softly, yet commanding the room's full attention. So let me be certain, he said carefully. Frank retires, we formalize succession rules. In exchange for peace and cooperation, Harlem is recognized as independent territory, free from interference by the 5 families. Is that correct? That's correct, Costello confirmed. He swept his gaze around the table. A war between me and Vito costs all of you money. It invites attention we can't afford. What I'm offering is stability without weakness. Transition without chaos. You get new leadership. I get to live. The only losers are the federal agents waiting for us to destroy each other. Lukey's leaned forward. And if we refuse? Bumpy's smile was thin and cold. Then Frank and I walk out. You spend 6 months hunting him while Harlem makes your lives expensive. Every number operation uptown shuts down. Every shipment crossing my streets disappears. And every soldier you send looking for him. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The silence that followed was heavy, the silence of men calculating profit margins against body counts. Bonanno spoke first. I vote yes, Frank retires, Vito becomes boss. Succession rules begin today, Harlem stands independent. Gambino nodded, yes. Lukey's raised his hand, yes. Angelo Bruno, visiting from Philadelphia, exhaled cigar smoke slowly, yes. All eyes turned to Vito. He sat rigid at the head of the table. He had secured the title, but at a cost, power with constraints, authority with oversight. He would lead, but not unchecked. Finally, through clenched teeth. Yes. The word landed like a curse. Costello finished his wine in a single swallow. Congratulations, Vito, he said calmly. You have what you wanted, try not to squander it. He retired to Sands Point, Long Island, living quietly for 16 more years until his death in 1973 at 82. He never returned to Harlem. Each Christmas, he sent Bumpy Johnson a case of champagne. Each year, Bumpy sent bourbon in return. Neither man ever explained the gesture. Vito Genovese assumed control of the commission and quickly discovered that holding the title was not the same as commanding respect. Arrested in 1959 on narcotics charges, he died in prison a decade later, still insisting he had been framed, still claiming he could have built an empire that lasted forever. Few believed him. Bumpy Johnson remained Harlem's most powerful figure, never officially joining the commission, never taking orders from Little Italy, yet operating with recognition none could ignore. He had walked into the room as an outsider. He left as something far more dangerous. An independent force the commission had no choice but to acknowledge. When Bumpy Johnson died in 1968, Carlo Gambino sent a funeral wreath so massive it required 4 men to carry it. White roses, a single card attached. With respect, nothing more needed to be writ. The succession rules Frank Costello forced the commission to adopt became the framework for organized crime in America for the next 30 years. Bosses could still be challenged, territories could still be contested. But from that point forward, power required process, votes, consensus, structure. Some historians argue those reforms prevented a full-scale mob war, the kind that would have handed federal prosecutors everything they needed to dismantle the mafia entirely. But Harlem remembered something else. They remembered the night Frank Costello called Bumpy Johnson for protection. They remembered the 19 days when the most hunted man in America hid inside a Harlem brownstone while Vito Genovese tore through Manhattan searching for him. They remembered the moment a black man walked into a private room of Italian mob bosses and calmly told them how the future would work. And they remembered that the bosses listened. Because real power is not measured by how many guns you command. It is measured by being the one person everyone needs when the situation becomes desperate enough. In Harlem's social clubs and barbershops, an old story is still passed down. It says that on the night of May 24th, after the commission meeting ended, Bumpy Johnson stood outside Concilio's restaurant, lighting a cigarette while Frank Costello waited for his car. After a long silence, Costello spoke. "I owe you my life." Bumpy exhaled smoke toward the streetlights. "You don't owe me your life," he said. "You paid for it, you admitted the old rules were broken, you accepted that power in this city doesn't belong to one group anymore." Costello asked quietly, "Was it worth it, 19 days hiding while Vito hunted me?" Bumpy dropped his cigarette and crushed it beneath his heel. "You're still breathing, Frank. In our world, that's the only measure that counts." The car pulled up. Costello stepped inside without another word. Bumpy watched the taillights fade into the distance, then he turned north back toward Harlem. Back toward territory that was now, officially and undeniably, his. That night taught something lasting. Power is not violence. It is not fear. It is not the number of soldiers you command. Power is positioning yourself so precisely that decisions cannot be made without accounting for you. Frank Costello understood that. Vito Genovese never did, which is why one man died peacefully at 82 and the other died behind prison walls. And Bumpy Johnson, who began that chapter with nothing but a late-night phone call and a calculated risk, ended it with control of Harlem and the reluctant respect of every major crime boss in New York. That is how survival works in a world where loyalty lasts only as long as it remains profitable. Where systems shift overnight. Where sometimes everything changes because someone answered a phone at 3:14 in the morning when no one else would. This story is shared for historical perspective and reflection, not to glorify violence or criminal life. These stories take weeks of research, writing, and careful construction. If this resonated with you, if you recognize the deeper lesson about accountability, structure, and choosing reform over destruction, make sure you subscribe. These stories take weeks of research and writing. Help us reach more subscribers so we can keep telling the real stories behind organized crime, the ones where intelligence wins over impulse. The next episode is coming soon.